Hey, this is Derek with Distant Thought Candle Company. I'm just going to do a quick tutorial, just a walkthrough of how I do everything with my process, as far as preparing, melting, pouring, stirring everything. So, big thing that I always look for is the condition of my candle room. I always, before I start any production, I just do a quick vacuum, maybe hit a dust if it's something I'm noticing is some cleanliness or organization issues, just to get my mind in the right set and just to remove those small occurrences that can happen. You're stirring and you've got a little bit of dust that gets into your mixing pitcher or whatever, or you've put your vessels out and you've got them everything wicked, and some kind of debris falls in there. So I always like to clean out all of my vessels, alcohol 93, 99%, either one. Clean them, let them sit, then add my wick stickers and my wicks, and then go from there. But always like to just be prepared. I usually like to let them sit out for a couple hours, just so they can start to adhere. And if it is cold outside, or if it's cold in my house, I'll hit them with the heat gun for a second, just to add a little bit of warmth to them to improve that stickiness and that adhesion. So got of I think 12 6 ounces that I'm putting together this afternoon, and a couple 12 6 ounces, and three 12 ounces that I'm going to put together. I'm going to work on that and probably videotape some of that and just add it into the video. But um, let's get started. So on my 6 ounce candles, I'm using a 10 from Flaming Candle, and I'm using the CD20 wicks. It actually was the recommended one from a wick guide I was using, and it worked. But for my 12-ounce containers, also from Flaming Candle, um, I'm not using the recommended wick because they were underperforming. So I went over that in a different video, and I did end up using an LX16 double wick for the 12 ounce. So um, really enjoyed the performance from that. Flames were really consistently good, but a couple things that I really wanted to point out were the wick stickers I'm using are the Candle Science Wick Sticker Pro. They are really adhesive, but you've got to make sure that you're gentle when removing some of the protective coating and everything, because it'll stick on there, and if you pull too hard without releasing the adhesion, it will rip the paper or rip the label. So just something to be mindful of is you don't have to apply too much pressure. Pressure doesn't always give you the result you want. A lot of the times finesse will, and that's something that I've picked up on making candles for the past year is with being methodical as much as you can, and paying attention to, like, being fast and aggressive isn't always going to get you what you want out of it. So it's something that I've picked up. So the tool I'm using, these are from Norden Candle Supply. I really like them. They actually have most of the vessels out there. They have already pre-measured, so that when you get this 16-ounce 10, it's going to fit perfectly. There's no shake to it. There is a little bit of movement in the actual wick setter. So typically what I'll do is I'll leave it on a flat surface and just let gravity do the work, and it keeps it. I mean, haven't had any issues with it not being on center. So um, I just know that when I try to put it down myself, I'll usually favor to one side or the other, and it's probably not noticeable by anyone but me, but it's not. I mean, that stuff will drive me crazy. So that's just who I am. So this one, when I went to pull it, I can feel some tension in there. So I'm just going to roll around the edge, and it came off perfectly. So just something to be aware of. I don't like to waste anything if I can avoid it. So being more deliberate kind of allows me to avoid outcomes that I don't want. So just going to drop it, add a little pressure. Now I will squeeze all of these. I'll squeeze the wick base before I'm actually going to do anything with them, just for a little bit of peace of mind. But make sure it makes me so that I don't get any air in there. I don't like to think, or at least like squeeze out any part of the sticker that hasn't made contact with the vessel. So it's just something that helps me out a lot. I will go ahead and say it's super impressive to see people use just like a handheld Wick sticker. I can't paint within or color within the lines, so anything that requires that kind of precision, I'm just never going to be great at. So I just eliminate my abilities to leave myself dissatisfied, I guess. I know there are a lot of candle makers that live up north. I'm in Florida, so typically it's not going to be cold. So I don't have to worry about the ambient room temperature or um, the temperature of the walls, things like that. But right now it is in the 40s here in Florida during the day, and trying to be aware of that. So I probably will pull out a heat gun and hit these for a few seconds just to aid as much as possible in the adhesion. But I've got everything set here, so I'm just gonna apply pressure to the wick base on all of them, and then probably start melting some wax as the next step. And I'm just taking my thumbs, if you can see that, and applying a little bit of pressure on there. Probably not necessary, but remove any vulnerabilities in your process. So currently I'm using the 16-ounce bottles of fragrance oil from Candle Science. I've seen over the past year a lot of people complaining about the screw tops because you're always going to have drip and everything. So I stumbled across someone the other day talking about these pour spouts. They're just twist spouts that I was able to find on Amazon. They were $7 or $8 for I think 100 of them, and they are the 24-410, I believe. Um, yeah, 24-410 twist top, and they work perfectly. There's no oil leaking. Everything's good. So definitely grab these if you have Candle Science. I can't speak for other brands because the majority of what I'm doing right now is with Candle Science fragrance oils. So highly, highly, highly recommend that. And I'm gonna go change out all 50 of these now. I like to recommend always use glass for fragrance oils. I know some people will use the silicone ones, which is fine, but for me, I really like the fact that I can use this, get the oil out, hit it with alcohol, and for the most part, everything's gone. They are fragile, but another thing to look for is when you're getting a scale. Doesn't have to be some expensive scale. This is $17 on Amazon, but always try to get something that's past the decimal point for grams. So this one will give me zero point 0.0 as a starting base. So um, without that, you never know what your actual amount's going to be. You could have something that's 3.9, but it's not going to round up automatically on those other scales. It's just going to say 3. So something I always look for is to make sure that I can get as descriptive as possible with my information. So highly recommend that. Got my wax melter heating up. I'm going to go ahead and weigh out wax for. I'm going to do six ounces at once, and then I'll do three 12-ounce after that. But everything's pretty much set up. I like to have everything set where I can work across the room as I need to. Start here, then go there, vice versa. So just kind of my method to my madness. So I see a lot of people asking about cleaning. You want to make everyone wants this melting pot to be perfect every time you use it. I don't like to do anything in the sink when it comes to fragrance oils or wax, just because of the implications it could have on its ability to drain, as well as the contaminants and anything that could end up in the water system. So one thing I always do is, if I don't get to it right after pouring and I'm a little bit lazy, I'll hit it with the heat gun, take a paper towel, or two and try to get out as much wax as possible. And then I'll follow that up with a couple sprays of alcohol while it's still warm and make sure that I get out any other residue. I know a lot of people worried about fragrance bleeding into your next batch if it's a different kind, but the amount of fragrance oil that is left in this pitcher, even if you get everything out, the amount that's left in there is minuscule, and you will never notice the difference in another candle. The only times I'm even more hyper, cautious if I'm using something with cinnamon in it, just because it is an allergen for some people. So that's about the only time where I'll probably hit this 2 or 3 times with alcohol, and then I always make sure that it sits and I can't smell the alcohol on it again I before I actually start putting wax in there. So just a tip: paper towels. I know they seem wasteful, but I'd rather waste some paper products than putting contaminants into any kind of water system or putting wax into my sink drains and things. Other alternative, I've seen people talk about washing it outside, and disposing that in the water, or into the ground. But I still don't want fragrance oil getting anywhere. So paper towels into the trash is usually going to be your best bet, and you can follow that up with wiping out with alcohol, and just letting those dry and let the alcohol flash is what they would call it. But just something I'm working on right now, getting ready to start pouring some candles. I wanted to go ahead and clean out a couple of wax pitchers so that I can actually do that. So, little bonus tip. So we're about to start pouring hot wax and mix in fragrance oil. Something that I can't recommend enough is either getting a timer or using your phone for a timer to make sure you're stirring at least 2 minutes. I know it sounds arbitrary, but sometimes when we're stirring without like an actual clock, our mental clock is what we're relying on, and sometimes that extra 30 seconds that we're not accounting for has a huge effect. Usually I'm around 8% fragrance oil percentage, but I do know people that will go up to 9 and 10%, and I would even probably stir 2.5 3 minutes at that point. So just from my own my product itself, I really like being around 8%, maybe a little over. But we're going to go ahead and get this done. I'm going to set a timer once everything's combined, and maybe time lapse this thing to speed it up. Check temperature now. We're at 166. I want this to get to about 155, 154, and then start pouring. I'm going to go ahead and get these wick centers done on the rest of these candles. Those are also from Norton Supply. I really like them. I do like to make sure that my wicks are taut before pouring. Not super tight, but just upright so that they're not moving in the cooling process. I know some people will pour wax and then center the wicks, and I've gotten comfortable doing it this way, so it's just how I've been doing it. So when I'm getting ready to pour, I used an infrared thermometer, so I always like to just give a little stir so that everything is mixing back in, because this thermometer is only going to read the top, so I want to make sure that the top and bottom are similar temperatures. So this right now is about 158. We're going to give it a minute, but just wanted to make sure that um, sometimes the bottom, especially when the walls are cold in the winter, the surface is going to cool quickest. So you want to make sure that you're not pouring off of just what the temperature is on the top. Otherwise, you can use something like a candy thermometer that'll give you an accurate read, because it will be reading from further down in your pitcher. So just something to be aware of when you're, getting to the point where you want to start tracking the temperatures you're pouring at, notating everything. You want to make sure you're getting an accurate reading from here so that you know what your tops are going to look like when you pour them. So right now it's reading 154, but as soon as I stir it, it's up to 158 again. So I always want to make sure we're trying to get the most accurate information as possible, and that'll usually help us in the long run. So something that I don't see a lot of people talk about in depth is your candle room itself, or whatever space you're using. I used to have this flat against the wall over here, but it really only allowed me to work from one side of the table. So I just flipped it out. It's just a 3 shelf rack that I got from probably IKEA or something, and I just cut up some wood to put on a flat surface. Um, I like having it long ways because I can pour from this side while this is cooling. I can pour from the other side, or I can work in from the middle out on both sides and be able to utilize all the space. So it also just opens up the floorway a little bit, so I can walk through. I can have everything staggered in this room. So just something to be mindful of is when you're setting things up, you're going to change it 5 or 6 times to figure out what works best for you. So I'm going to check the temperature on this wax. Still a little warm, so I'm going to go ahead and pour it and make note. So something I'm always cognizant of is how slow I'm pouring. The faster we pour, the more air that we give ourselves the opportunity to get in there. So try to pour as slow as possible, minimize my movement, just so everything is consistent. You're going to see air bubbles in there when you pour, but those should work themselves out. If not, I always keep a handful of toothpicks nearby. So if it's been sitting for 20 minutes and I see an air bubble, I'll just go over there and pop that little guy. So I don't want that turning into a crater on top or anything like that. But just pouring slow, consistent, just so everything is the same. Hardest thing to master is just getting consistently good tops without having to heat gun them after they've cooled. What I'll end up doing is let these sit out overnight undisturbed like this. This room doesn't have any AC vents, so I don't have to worry about drafts as much as I would. They'll sit overnight, and then probably tomorrow lunchtime, I'll trim the wicks and get them in a closet for storing or for curing. I do have a closet in the middle of my house that is interior wall only, so it's perfect. It doesn't have any air, doesn't have anything I have to worry about in terms of disturbing the curing process. No sunlight on the walls, nothing that'll interfere with just being cool and calm. So everything's going to sit here overnight. I'll come back tomorrow, trim the wicks,